All right, guys, thanks for joining us this morning. We're going to be reviewing simple schedules of reinforcement in ABA. In other words, understanding how reinforcement affects behavior. And it's pretty interesting. The patterns of reinforcement, when we reinforce behavior on different patterns, what we see is different rates of responding. So pretty interesting. And we want to use different reinforcing techniques when we're teaching, depending on what behavior we're teaching. If we're teaching a skill acquisition behavior, we want to use certain schedules of reinforcement. And if we're trying to reduce behavior, we want to use certain different schedules of reinforcement. And we're going to get into each simple schedule of reinforcement today. If you guys have any questions during the presentation, just please ask. It's an open discussion. We love to hear what you have to say. If you have anything to offer or any questions to ask, please do so. So let's get right into it. Simple schedules of reinforcement. And guys, when we're talking about reinforcement, what section should this go in your behavior support plans?
Consequence.
Yeah, in the consequence section. So these are strategies that belong in the consequence section of your behavior support plan and obviously occur when we're working with our VIPs after we see behavior, right? These are gonna be strategies we implement after we see behavior. So let's get into it. Okay, the schedules of reinforcement. Like we said, it's the pattern that dictates how reinforcement is distributed over time or responses, which directly affects how quickly a behavior is learned and how resistant it is to extinction as well. So important to consider. And when we say the word extinction, what do we mean?
Withholding reinforcement for a behavior.
Yeah, so exactly right. So we're gonna, instead of reinforcing a previously learned behavior, we're going to withhold the reinforcement, which would cause what effect to that behavior?
Most likely an extinction burst or the behavioral increase.
The behavior will not increase, but
I guess decrease. Sometimes there's extinction burst. So
yes. Okay. Okay. I see what you mean. So yeah, there's these
mm,
unwanted symptoms of extinction we need to consider, and we could see that momentary increase in the rate of behavior, like Brandon was saying, that extinction burst. But over time, if a behavior is led to extinction or no reinforcement, we expect that behavior to be reduced over time, that it should be, and we use the word punished or reduced over time. So here's a graph, and we'll be referencing this throughout the training this morning. And this is kind of showing us on a cumulative record how quickly behaviors are occurring. So the steeper the slope here indicates a higher rate of responding. So we have these four schedules that we're concerned about today, which is the variable ratio schedule, a fixed ratio schedule, variable interval schedule, and a fixed interval schedule. And I know that if you're going for your RBT, or sitting for your BCBA exam, this information is definitely going to be a part of it. So when we're going to talk about each one, we're going to talk about exactly what these words mean, and we're also going to we're going to come back to this graph and look at the rate of responding. So obviously, behaviors that are occurring on a variable ratio schedule are going to produce the highest rates of responding. So those are typically a natural schedule that we see, a schedule that kind of naturally occurs in our everyday lives, this variable ratio schedule. But I think first we're going to get into this continuous reinforcement. And a continuous reinforcement, what this means is we're going to reinforce every occurrence of the target behavior. So every time this behavior occurs, we're going to apply reinforcement. And these are best for learning new behaviors. So when we're teaching our VIP a behavior that they don't have much experience with, they're brand new with, we want to make sure we're reinforcing every instance of the behavior. And when we say reinforcement, I mean, we're going to say reinforcement 1,000 times during this training. What do we mean? So we could be so clear in what this word means to us. What does the word reinforcement mean?
Increasing the likeliness of the behavior to happen again.
So a reinforcement has this effect on behavior that we're going to see this behavior happen again and again in the future, and that's precisely what reinforcement means. The definition of reinforcement. Thank you for that, Andy. So And what are we actually doing? Like, can we have an example of what reinforcement may look like to our VIPs or to us?
Be with the client, they display the behavior that we're looking for, and they, get a drink if that's like their choice, their their reward that they really like, or perhaps if a client does a little bit of work and program on an activity, and then they can have a break.
Okay, yeah, so exactly right. So we're going to be setting up the environment to provide these reinforcement opportunities for behaviors we like. And what we're doing is we're making an environmental change, right? We're either adding something to the environment or we're taking something adversive away from the environment in order to reinforce behavior. So when we add something, and it could be a tangible item like Andy suggested, or removal of an item that they don't like, could have those reinforcing effects on our VIP. But also a positive praise statement, right? A certain attention could be reinforcing to our VIP. So those are important considerations to make. So when we're talking about and it's important that we know the preferences of our VIP so we could provide things that are preferred to them after behavior occurs that we'd like to see. But just because someone prefers an item doesn't mean it's reinforcing. The true test of reinforcement is when we see that increase on the graph in the future under the same antecedent conditions. So that is what reinforcement exactly means. So thank you for that. So with continuous reinforcement, we're going to reinforce every instance of this behavior. Every time this behavior occurs, we're going to apply reinforcement to this behavior. And like we said, it's best for learning new behavior. So if we're brand new to a behavior, it's best if we have that reinforcement continuous for every single instance of that behavior we are applying reinforcement. So best, like we said, best used when teaching a new skill or behavior because it leads to rapid acquisition of the behavior. And we call this continuous reinforcement, but it's also considered an FR1 schedule where it's fixed ratio one. For every instance of this behavior, we're going to be providing reinforcement of some type. Okay, so that's continuous reinforcement or FR1 schedule. And we have to consider if we, during this time, if we stop providing the reinforcement, this behavior may extinguish quickly. And that's what you tend to see for these fixed schedules. That on these fixed schedules, we see when reinforcement stops, that the behavior extinguishes quickly or it starts to become reduced over time. Does anyone have any questions about continuous reinforcement? So in your behavior support plan, guys, this would be a great idea if we added a skill or a new behavior that we're working on. We would want to make sure that we are providing this continuous reinforcement. The next one is the fixed ratio. And again, the continuous reinforcement is essentially just a fixed ratio one schedule. So reinforcement occurs after a set number of responses. So an example here is the FR5 or the fixed ratio 5. And every 5 responses, we're going to deliver reinforcement. So that's what the FR5 means, the F fixed ratio 5. It produces a high rate of responding with a short pause after reinforcement. And that's just called the post-reinforcement pause. And an example here is a child receives a sticker after every 5 correct math problems that they answer. And this could have a reinforcing effect on them answering math questions. It's useful for increasing behavior frequency once the behavior is learned. So the idea here is that we start off with that continuous reinforcement that we're going to reinforce every instance of that behavior. And then over time, we're going to slowly increase the quota. We could move to a fixed ratio 2 or 3 or 4, in this case, a fixed ratio 5. And what we're doing is we're thinning the reinforcement, but it's still hopefully going to maintain that behavior over time, especially if we do it in that slow fashion. So again, in your behavior support plan, you may want to write that you're going to start off using a continuous method, and then slowly as the behavior starts to maintain according to our graphing, then we're going to start to increase that to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. This helps, and you might ask, well, why do we want to increase the quota here before we deliver reinforcement. Does anyone have a good idea why we might want to do that?
Like, what do you mean by quota? Like the
Well, like a continuous reinforcement where we reinforce every instance of that behavior. And what the idea here is when the behavior starts to maintain, we want to increase the quota. So we might want to move it to a fixed ratio 5, for instance. So we would require 5 responses before we deliver reinforcement. That's what I mean by increasing the quota. But why would we want to consider doing that?
they become like dependent. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Christian. My bad.
I was gonna say, is it so that the behavior itself increases, like, so it happens more often?
Yes, so that's right. That's what we're trying to do with the reinforcement. So you're right, Christian, that that that's why we want to do this. But what's the other reason why we don't want, and I don't want to give the word away, we don't want to just blast them with reinforcement over and over and over. What kind of effect might that have on our reinforcement?
They might become dependent on it.
Well, they might become dependent on it. What's
And less
another?
effective, like satiated
Yes,
on it. Like, oh
yes.
my
So
gosh,
that's
enough,
exactly
dude.
right. That's
All
exactly
right.
right. So as we give this reinforcement, what tends to happen to it? It's if it's the same reinforcement, it starts to lose its luster, right?
Good job. Good job. Good
So
job. Good job.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. So fading this reinforcement or delivering it less often could be a way to help stop that satiation effect that we see from reinforcement being delivered over and over. Any questions about fixed ratios? So then and if we look on the graph quick, we're going to go back. We can see in blue here's the fixed ratio schedule, and we see the steeper the level of slope, and each one of those sideways lines indicates that reinforcement has been delivered. And what we see steady, steep responding rates for a fixed ratio schedule. And we also see a short post-reinforcement pause where that line goes straight after reinforcement is delivered. So that's the fixed ratio schedule. The next schedule we're talking about is the variable ratio schedule. And guys, like I said when we first started, the variable ratio schedule is what we see most naturally in our environment. Through our day-to-day life, lots of behaviors we engage in are on this variable ratio schedule. Because you can imagine, like telling a joke, right? I could tell a joke and for some people, it may hit the mark and I might get that attention or that laugh that I really like, and then other people, not really. But the variable ratio is kind of built in all of us to ensure our survival. And if we think about it, it makes sense. When we are hunter and gatherers, the variable ratio schedule ensured our survival because we would look for berries in bushes, right? And we would look in one bush, no berries. We'd look in another bush, we'd find some berries, and that would reinforce our behavior. We'd look in another bush, nothing. Look in another bush, nothing. We look in another bush, and then yes, we'd find a ton of berries. So the variable ratio schedule is very effective to maintain behaviors. And because of the variable nature of it, it's very resistant to extinction. So what do we mean by variable ratio? Maybe I got ahead of myself. Variable ratio schedule is reinforcement occurs after a variable number of responses around an average. So if we see VR5, we see on average every 5 responses. So what we mean by this is if we have a VR5 schedule that it could be after 4 responses, it could be after 5, it could be after 6, but we're going to be delivering reinforcement on kind of this average schedule where it's not going to be fixed. It's going to be this variable schedule around 5 responses. And we see this schedule produces a high, steady rate of responding with a minimal pause. So we don't really see that post-reinforcement pause like the fixed ratio schedules produce. It's harder, like I mentioned, for this behavior to be extinguished compared to an FR. And if we go back to my berry example, can you imagine if we looked in 1 or 2 bushes and we didn't find any berries and our gathering has a behavior is extinct and we don't engage in that behavior anymore and we go hungry, right? So this variable ratio schedule really ensured our survival and it produces the high steady rate of responding. So in my example here, and this one really hits home with a lot of us, these slot machines at the casino, all these games at the casino casino are set up on this variable ratio schedule where we pull the lever every so many times and eventually it will pay out. And the casinos didn't just set this up randomly. They are wise to our behavioral science. They are wise to get humans hooked on gambling, right? So the slot machine, it's no wonder the slot machine is set up on this variable ratio schedule where maybe every 5 pulls it gets paid out. And what we see is that this produces a high, steady rate of responding, which is exactly what the casino owners like to see. And also, it is resistant to an extinction. So as people start to lose, as people start to lose and they don't win as often, we see this behavior maintained. So very resistant to extinction. So and like I said, the variable ratio schedule dealing with problem behaviors is a very common reinforcement schedule that we see in our work. And if we see that line, I mean, there's no post reinforcement pause. It's going almost straight up, and reinforcement is being delivered every so often for every so many responses. When we see problem behaviors on this variable ratio schedule, it's important that we recognize this is happening and try to change the schedule of reinforcement by doing something a little bit different. So this is variable ratio schedule, and you'll see it here in the red. Does anyone have any questions about variable ratio schedules?
I'm sorry, I'm just a little confused.
Please.
They kind of, variable ratio and fixed ratio kind of seem the same to me, but from my understanding, fixed ratio is like every third time, and then variable ratio could be like the second time, and then the fifth time, and then so it kind of jumps around. Am I correct?
That's totally correct. So that's really the only difference, Chloe.
Okay, thank you.
We're going to be delivering reinforcement for a fixed ratio. Say we have a fixed ratio of 3, like you suggested, but you could have a fixed ratio any number. And we're going to wait for, if we had a fixed ratio of 3, every 3 responses, we're going to deliver reinforcement. On the variable ratio schedule 3, it'd be about every 3. So sometimes we would deliver it for 2, 3, 4. So it's really on that variable ratio schedule. And think about how that would affect our responding. Maybe it's the next one. Maybe it's the next one. So it gets us very motivated to want to complete this behavior because maybe that next one, maybe that next pull on that slot machine is going to pay out. So it produces the highest rates of responding. And like I said, a lot of our VIPs, and naturally through our interactions in the environment, behaviors that a lot of us engage in are on this variable ratio schedule. So it becomes a problem when we see a problem or a challenging behavior being reinforced on this variable ratio schedule because we're going to see it occur at higher rates. And we're also going to see it's very resistant to extinction strategies as well. So it's going to hang around a bit longer than behaviors reinforced on another schedule reinforcement. But guys, I want you to also consider that behaviors that we want to see more often could be very effective and very wise to put those behaviors on a variable ratio schedule that we're going to reinforce every so often because we want this behavior to occur more often. We want to see these skill acquisition behaviors occur more often. So after we do a continuous reinforcement, we're going to fade to this variable schedule and we're going to really get it on this variable schedule so we see it occur at higher rates. We have more practice opportunities. So we could use variable ratio schedules for both to steer problem behaviors away from it and also to put skill acquisition or behaviors to improve on it. Does anyone have any other questions?
Mike, I just want to add something real quick. I had a client who was engaging in a lot of just repetitive questions over and over and over. And you were something that you taught me to do was at first you're like, they're looking for the reinforcement. They just don't know when they're going to get it. So if you could kind of put it on a consistent basis, so like a consistent ratio, like a fixed ratio, or using even like a time-based schedule, like use a timer at the end of the 2 minutes, I'll answer the question. That seemed to really help decrease a lot of the repetitive behaviors with something that one of these like techniques here.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Brandon. So that's a great strategy, and that's what the research tells us to do here, is when we notice a problem behavior on this variable ratio schedule, and think about how hard this cell is to teach a family member or a staff member perhaps to do this. But we had a VIP that was asking the same question all the day. It was consuming his life. So what we asked the staff to do was to respond to every question. So we moved it from a variable ratio schedule to a fixed ratio. And what that did immediately was lower the just slightly, but lowered the rate of this behavior occurring and also resulted in this post reinforcement pause that we tend to see. After we did a couple days on this fixed ratio, we tried to move it over to a fixed interval schedule. And we'll talk about that next. Does anyone have any other questions about these ratio schedules? Or why they're fixed or why they're variable? Okay, let's get back to it. Fixed interval schedules. So this is reinforcement. And when we see the word interval, we have to think of time, right? So these interval schedules are going to be there's going to be a time component associated with them. So we have this fixed interval, and if we see a fixed interval too, what we mean is reinforcement occurs for the first response after a fixed amount of time. So if we have an FI2, what that means is 2 minutes. So after 2 minutes, we would want the VIP to engage in one instance of the response. And when they do, we supply reinforcement. It produces scallop pattern of responding, slow responses just after reinforcement and then faster as the interval ends. And we'll take a look at this scallop pattern on the graph in a moment. So here we see a worker is paid every 2 weeks regardless of daily productivity. So we see this, and we're so used to getting paid like this in the world, right? Where we get a paycheck every 2 weeks, but we know this is a fixed interval schedule. So it doesn't matter how much work someone does, maybe in like a factory, if they're paid on this type of schedule, it doesn't matter how much they do, they're always going to get paid, and they're always going to get paid the same exact time, regardless of daily productivity. So it's good for teaching behaviors that need to occur at a specific time. It's useful. It's also useful for teachers for teaching learners to remain engaged or on task for longer periods. But it's also good to do sometimes to put problem behaviors on this fixed interval schedule. And we use a timer, and we indicate at the end of the interval, from this in Brandon's example, that they could ask the question. And when we go back to the graph, I should just put the graph in after every slide. If we go back to this graph, we see the fixed interval schedule here in yellow. And what we see is the scallop. This is what they mean by scallop pattern. And when we see this flat line, that indicates no responding is happening. At the end of the interval, we see a response occurs and then reinforcements delivered. So if we go back to our slot machine, and if we had the slot machine on, instead of a variable ratio schedule, a fixed interval schedule, say we had a fixed interval 3, what kind of response rate would we expect to see from the patron at the casino?
They wouldn't engage in the response until close to the third, like say it was 3 minutes, because they knew reinforcement would come in 3 minutes.
Yeah, so they would wait till the end of the interval, no responding, no responding, no responding, and they'd wait till the end of the interval because they know that's the only time reinforcement's available. They would engage in one instance of the response and then reinforcement would be delivered. So we could see behaviors, and you could see the rate of responding here is much lower than the variable ratio schedule. So when we deliver on this fixed interval, we see the rate of responding is reduced. And it makes sense why. People aren't going to, or any organism isn't going to engage in effortful behavior when reinforcement is not available. We're going to wait till reinforcement's available and engage in this behavior. So if we go back to the repetitive question example from one of our VIPs, we move them on a variable ratio schedule. That's what they were naturally being reinforced by. We've seen this behavior occur all day long, especially when our VIP was not actively engaged in an activity. And then we moved it to a fixed ratio schedule, so we're making progress. We saw a slight reduction in the rate of that behavior. After maybe a week on this schedule, we'd like to change it to this fixed interval schedule. Now the VIP can ask the question, because that's not a bad behavior, asking questions. But it's only going to occur at the end of the interval, and we could get back to living a good life free of these obsessive thoughts. And just one of the strategies we would implement for that type of behavior. Does anyone have any questions about fixed interval schedules, the scallop pattern, or anything else? Okay. Finally, we have a variable interval schedule, and variable, just means the same exact thing. It's on average. But this time, instead of an average amount of behaviors, we're talking about an average amount of time. So reinforcement occurs for the first response after a varied amount of time around an average. So if we see VI2, what we mean is about on average every 2 minutes, reinforcement will become available. It produces a steady, moderate response rate. The variable ratio schedule, because reinforcement is unpredictable, extinction is slower. So the variable schedules are much more resistant to extinction strategies. So it helps to maintain a behavior as well. To put skill acquisition on a variable schedule, it helps ensure that the behavior will maintain over time. And I like this example a real lot where pop quizzes encourages the student to study consistently rather than cramming. And I'm like, wow, that's such a brilliant example here for variable interval schedules for pop quizzes. Because I remember myself in school, my teacher would give us an assignment. It might be like a term paper, and all of us were in the line, and it was due on a certain day, where all of the students, I remember, were in the library the day before, the night before the paper was due, trying to bang it out. So we see on that fixed interval schedule that scallop pattern that we're not going to respond until the end of the interval. But if our teacher instead said, hey, your term paper is going to be due sometime next week, you're not sure exactly when it's going to be due, but it's going to be due at some time, that kind of schedule would likely produce us to work on that paper more consistently rather than right at the end of the interval. So we see we can manipulate these simple schedules of reinforcement to really change the rate of behavior depending on what we want to work on. And the better you understand these schedules of reinforcement, the better you can help our VIPs. So these are the 4 of the simple schedules of reinforcement. Do you guys have any questions about any of them or want to say anything about anything here? Okay. So here's the graph again, and we see this variable interval schedule right here in turquoise or teal. And as you see, it's a steady rate of responding because the person isn't sure exactly when reinforcement will become available on this variable interval schedule. So they kind of keep testing. They can kind of engage in the behavior to see if reinforcement's going to happen. And again, because it's variable, we see it's very resistant to extinction strategies. So which could be a good thing for skill acquisition behaviors. It could be a good thing because obviously in the natural environment, reinforcement probably won't be available for every single response someone engages in. Does anyone have any questions about the graph here or any of these schedules? And of course, we talk about them in supervision. This is just an overview for you guys. Okay, the final schedules we're going to take a look at are time-based schedules. And Brandon mentioned these earlier. And these time-based schedules are very important. And these schedules are more of antecedent strategies. So we're just going to do throughout the day, before behaviors occur, we're going to think about using these time-based schedules. Time-based schedules means we're going to deliver reinforcement after a fixed or variable amount of time, regardless of behavior. So with these time schedules, we don't care what behavior is going on. We're going to be delivering reinforcement throughout the shift, throughout our session. The learner does not, and like I said, the learner does not have to engage in a specific response to receive reinforcement. We're just going to be delivering it throughout the day. it's gonna have the effect of suppressing behavior. So these time-based schedules are used for problem behaviors, guys. So if we have a problem behavior that's being maintained by attention, we see this over and over again. This person engages in, I was talking to a BCBA yesterday on our team, and we were working with a kiddo, and they engage in a lot of behaviors to get attention. They're running away from staff. They're being a troublemaker, and the staff are responding, and the kid loves it. The kid's very reinforced by engaging in this problem behaviors. What did the BCBA recommend right away was to give that high quality attention throughout the day, to just continuously give this person high quality attention, the attention they like, because we know that that kind of antecedent strategy is going to suppress that problem behavior. As this person is receiving attention, no need to engage in effortful behavior to get attention. And I want to even take it a step further, that I want to deliver that attention that that I could see a problem behavior being maintained by. So if I see this problem behavior being maintained by us reacting and causing a lot of attention for this problem behavior, those are the qualities I want to deliver on this time-based schedule. So the VIP can get exactly what reinforcement that they are looking for at that time. So again, this is for problem behaviors. It reduces problem behaviors by breaking the response reinforcer relationship. So as we're delivering this reinforcement as an antecedent, the person does not need to engage in effortful behavior to get it. They're already getting it. And I like to think of it very simply. I go into a restaurant and the waiter brings over water to me. Am I then asking for water?
No.
Exactly. No, I'm not. Right. So as the person gave me my reinforcer, no reason to engage in effortful behavior to get more of it. I already have it. Right. So the same is true. So when we notice problem behaviors and we recognize the function, or we recognize what is happening, why the person is engaging in this behavior, what is maintaining the behavior, we could then deliver it on a time-based schedule at first to help suppress that behavior. So we want to make sure we use it when we know the function and can deliver that function on that time-based schedule. We have some VIPs that maybe have potty accidents. Okay, so we're going to get on a bathroom schedule. We're gonna use the bathroom every hour during session, right? And that could be a way where we are helping the VIP potty train on this time-based schedule. We have other VIPs where we see them in stores. They might be taking food. So what would be an antecedent strategy that we put in place for that function?
Make sure they eat before they go out.
Yeah, make sure they're eating before they go out on, and making sure they have snacks throughout the day, making sure that we're satiating that need so that it's less likely these behaviors will happen in the field. So we could be more successful in these type of environments. So the best practice here, and this might be a little bit confusing, but we want to measure the inner response time of the problem behavior. So say the problem behavior is occurring once every 10 minutes. And we want to deliver reinforcement at 75% of that IRT. So if we have a behavior that's occurring every 10 minutes, how often do we want to set up our time-based schedule?
Maybe every 6 or 7 minutes before
Exactly
the
right.
behavior is more likely to occur.
Yes, so 6 or 7 minutes at getting ahead of the behavior. And the great idea, Carlin. Thank you. So exactly right. So we want to make sure that we know that inner response time and that we're going to be delivering this attention on this time-based schedule throughout the day. Attention, food, breaks, and we really need to know the function to be able to do this effectively. There's a limitation though. It does not teach replacement behavior. So as we're doing these time-based schedules, we're effectively suppressing problem behaviors, but we're not teaching a way that the VIP can access the reinforcement on their own, like learning a communication response or something like that. So the best practice here, guys, is to fade your time-based schedule. As you're working on replacement behaviors, as you're suppressing these problem behaviors, we're going to slowly fade our time-based schedule. We're going to increase the time before we deliver reinforcement, and we're going to give opportunities to practice this replacement behavior. Because if you think about it, these time-based schedules will suppress any behavior, whether it's a pro-social behavior for skill acquisition or a problem behavior. And obviously, we do not want to be suppressing pro-social behaviors or skill acquisition behaviors. So this is a great schedule to use at first to help our VIPs and the stakeholders reduce problem behaviors. But it's a strategy we want to fade away as we start to teach replacement skills. And this is one of my favorite strategies to implement when I hear about a problem behavior in supervision, and we know the function behind that behavior. My first strategy right out of the gate is to deliver that reinforcement on a time-based schedule. So I'm giving you my number one secret for antecedent strategies for problem behaviors is these time-based schedules. And like I said, it must be faded to help practice the alternative behavior we're going to teach. If I showed you this time-based schedule on a graph, we would see that the rate of responding would be nothing. It would be a line going across the bottom of the graph. There would be no responding on these time-based schedules. Does anyone have any questions about time-based schedules? We also review these time schedules in our antecedent-based training as well, which we did last week. Any questions? That's the end of the presentation, guys. Do you guys have any final questions for us about schedules of reinforcement? Don't hesitate. Give me a question.
I think you did a really good job explaining it, Mike.
Thank you, Chloe. I hope.
Mike, if we think of questions later, can we just message you on Teams?
Yeah, of course. You guys can always message me on Teams. I'll be happy to answer any questions you guys have, and not just about schedules of reinforcement, but any question you may have.
Oh,
If
nice.
I don't know the answer, which is likely, I will find out for you guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining me this morning, and I hope you guys have a good day and a good rest of your week, and reach out if you need anything. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks,
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Have a good one.